What happens when a prophet runs from God's command? This is the story of the most unwilling prophet who tried to escape his mission, but ended up saving an entire city of unbelievers. The story of Jonah is one of the most famous stories in the Bible, but its focus isn't just on Jonah being swallowed by a giant fish. At its core, it's about God's mercy and grace, even to the most unlikely recipients. Jonah, whose name means dove, was the son of Amittai, a prophet from Gath-Hepher, part of the tribe of Zebulun. He lived during the reign of Jeroboam II, a king known for expanding Israel's borders, but also for leading the nation into spiritual decay. Jonah was the earliest of the minor prophets, and although his story told in just 48 verses, its significance runs deep. His reluctance to obey God's command and the lessons he learned along the way revealed important truths about God's character, our own stubbornness, and the power of repentance. Jonah's mission was clear. God commanded him to go to Nineveh, the capital of Assyria, and warn the people of their impending destruction. Nineveh was no small city. It was a powerful metropolis, infamous for its violence, cruelty, and idolatry. The Assyrians were known to be a brutal empire, often torturing their enemies and conquering lands with ruthless force. To the Israelites, Assyria was not only a political threat, but also a moral one. The idea that God would show mercy to such a wicked nation was unthinkable to Jonah. Nineveh was located about 500 miles northeast of Israel, on the banks of the Tigris River, in what is now modern-day Mosul, Iraq. Historically, it was founded by Nimrod, the great-grandson of Noah, and became a hub of idol worship, particularly of the gods Asur and Ishtar. By the time of Jonah, Nineveh had become one of the largest Gentile cities, and God's call for Jonah to preach repentance there was highly unusual. In fact, Jonah was the only prophet in the Old Testament who was sent to preach directly to a Gentile nation. Despite God's clear command, Jonah refused. Rather than heading east towards Nineveh, Jonah fled west to the port city of Joppa, modern-day Jaffa, where he boarded a ship bound for Tarshish. Tarshish was likely located in modern-day southern Spain, at the edge of the known world. Jonah wasn't just trying to avoid God's command. He was attempting to escape as far away as possible from his responsibility. This decision reveals Jonah's deep-seated prejudice against the Ninevites. In his mind, they didn't deserve to hear God's message of repentance, let alone be saved. Jonah's disobedience was a direct rejection of God's mercy. He knew God's character well, and he feared that if the Ninevites repented, God would forgive them. And that was the last thing Jonah wanted. But as Jonah soon discovered, running from God's call isn't that simple. As he sailed toward Tarshish, God sent a violent storm that threatened to sink the ship. The sailors, terrified for their lives, cried out to their gods and began throwing cargo overboard to lighten the ship. But where was Jonah? Asleep in the hold of the ship, trying to hide from both the storm and his guilt. The captain, desperate for a solution, woke Jonah and urged him to pray to his God. The sailors then cast lots, a practice often used in the ancient world to seek divine guidance, to find out who was responsible for the calamity, and the lot fell on Jonah. When questioned, Jonah confessed that he was running away from God, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. This confession terrified the sailors. They realized they were dealing with a prophet of a powerful God, and they asked Jonah what they should do. Jonah's response was shocking. "Pick me up and throw me into the sea, and it will become calm." Jonah, still unwilling to fulfill God's mission, preferred to die rather than go to Nineveh. The sailors, reluctant to harm Jonah, tried to row back to land, but the storm only grew worse. Finally, with no other option, they prayed to Jonah's God, asking for forgiveness, and threw him overboard. Immediately, the sea calmed. The sailors, amazed by the power of Jonah's God, offered sacrifices and made vows to him. But Jonah's journey wasn't over. As he sank into the sea, God had prepared a great fish to swallow him. Now, this part of the story has often been debated. Some translations say whale, while others simply say great fish. Regardless of the species, the point is clear. God was not done with Jonah yet. He would use even the depths of the sea to bring Jonah to repentance. For 3 days and 3 nights, Jonah lived in the belly of the fish. Can you imagine the isolation, the darkness, the stench? It was this place of total helplessness that Jonah finally turned back to God. His prayer, recorded in Jonah chapter 2, reflects both his gratitude for God's deliverance and his renewed sense of duty. He acknowledges that his situation was God's judgment, but also recognizes that God is merciful. Jonah's words, "Salvation comes from the Lord," reflect his understanding that ultimately only God can save, whether it be from the depths of the sea or from sin. After 3 days, God commanded the fish to vomit Jonah onto dry land. Once again, God called Jonah to go to Nineveh. This time, Jonah obeyed. He traveled the long distance to Nineveh, a city so large that it took 3 days to walk through it. Upon arriving, Jonah proclaimed a simple message: 40 more days and Nineveh will be overthrown. Jonah's message was direct and uncompromising. But what happened next was nothing short of miraculous. The people of Nineveh, from the greatest to the least, believed God. They declared a fast and put on sackcloth, a sign of deep repentance. Even the king of Nineveh humbled himself, removing his royal robes, covering himself in sackcloth and sitting in ashes. He issued a decree that everyone, including animals, should fast and cry out to God, hoping that God would relent and spare the city. This mass repentance was an extraordinary act of God's grace. Nineveh, a city known for its violence and idolatry, had turned from its wicked ways after hearing the message of a reluctant prophet. God saw their repentance and, in His mercy, decided not to bring the destruction He had threatened. You might think that Jonah would be overjoyed by Nineveh's repentance and salvation, but instead, Jonah was furious. He prayed to God in anger, saying, "I knew that you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity." Jonah's anger wasn't because of God's justice. It was because of God's mercy. Jonah didn't want to see Nineveh spared. He wanted to see them punished. In his frustration, Jonah went outside the city and sat down, hoping to see what would happen. Perhaps he still hoped that Nineveh's repentance wouldn't last, and that God would destroy them after all. As he waited, God provided a leafy plant to give Jonah shade from the scorching sun. Jonah was pleased with the plant, but the next day, God sent a worm to eat the plant, and it withered. Then God sent a scorching east wind, and Jonah became faint, once again wishing for death. At this point, God spoke to Jonah, asking him, "Is it right for you to be angry about the plant?" Jonah insisted that it was. But God used the plant to teach Jonah a deeper lesson. He pointed out that Jonah was concerned about a plant he hadn't even tended, yet he had no compassion for the 120,000 people living in Nineveh who were spared from destruction. God's question at the end of the book is a powerful one. "And should I not have concern for the great city of Nineveh, in which there are more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left, and also many animals?" In this final statement, God reveals His heart for all people, even those we may consider unworthy. Jonah's prejudice blinded him to the fact that God's mercy extends beyond Israel, beyond his own understanding and beyond his comfort zone. The story of Jonah isn't just about a man who was swallowed by a fish. It's a story about God's relentless pursuit of sinners and his desire to show mercy to all people, even those we might consider our enemies. Jonah's reluctance and anger serve as a reminder that God's ways are higher than our ways, and his grace is far greater than we can imagine. No matter how far we run, God's mercy is always within reach. If Jonah, a reluctant and unwilling prophet, can be used to save an entire city, imagine what God can do through us when we obey his call. If you enjoyed this video and want to hear more amazing Bible stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click on the next video.